Before we start, if you're watching this from Arizona, New Mexico, or anywhere near the Navajo Nation, hit that subscribe button right now. What I'm about to tell you involves places you might have driven past, boundaries you might have crossed without knowing what you were crossing. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever felt like you were being watched on the reservation? Have you ever seen something that moved wrong, that didn't belong? Because after hearing this story, you'll understand why some roads on Navajo land are never patrolled at night, why certain areas are marked off limits even to tribal police, and why the elders still perform protection ceremonies along the boundary line. Smash that like button if you believe some borders are more than just lines on a map. My name is Officer Karen Benally. Navajo Tribal Police, Shiprock District, New Mexico. I've been on the force for 12 years and I grew up on the reservation. My grandmother was a medicine woman. My grandfather was a code talker in World War II. I know the land, I know the culture, and I know the difference between superstition and something real. This story is about something real. It started on September 14th, 2023. I was on night patrol along Highway 491, the stretch that runs along the eastern boundary of the Navajo Nation. It's a lonely road at night, cutting through high desert that looks like Mars in the darkness. Red rock formations looming like frozen giants. Sagebrush and juniper stretching to horizons you can't see. And silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. I'd been driving for about 2 hours when I saw it. Something crossing the highway about a quarter-mile ahead, moving fast. Too fast. My first thought was deer, but the way it moved was wrong. It ran on 4 legs, but the proportions were off. Too long in the body, too angular in the joints. I slowed down, hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. Growing up Navajo, you learn early not to talk about certain things. You don't say the Y word, especially not at night. You don't whistle after dark. You don't look too long at things that don't look right. But as a cop, I couldn't just ignore something crossing a highway. I pulled over where the thing had crossed and got out with my flashlight. The tracks in the dirt were clear, 4-legged, but the prints were too large for a coyote, too spread out for a dog. And there was something else. The prints glowed faintly in my flashlight beam, like they were radioactive or covered in some bioluminescent substance. I followed the tracks off the highway into the desert. They led east toward the boundary. The Navajo Nation has clearly marked borders, and this was heading straight for the line between tribal land and New Mexico state land. That's when I heard it. Not a howl, not exactly. More like a human scream that got twisted halfway through, turned into something animal. It came from ahead, from the direction the tracks were leading. I radioed it in. Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I'm about 10 miles north of Shiprock on 491, investigating possible injured wildlife. Heading off-road to track. Copy that, Unit 7. Be advised, you're approaching the eastern boundary. Radio if you need backup. I pushed through sagebrush and around rock formations, following the glowing tracks. They were moving faster now, more erratic, like whatever made them was panicking. Then I heard another sound. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets, coming from the same direction. And voices, low, guttural, speaking in a language I didn't recognize. I crested a small rise and saw them. 3 figures, man-sized but wrong, chasing the 4-legged thing I'd been tracking. The pursuers moved with purpose, organized, like a hunting pack. They wore what looked like animal skins, but the skins moved independent of their bodies, writhing like they were still alive. The 4-legged creature reached a point about 50 yards ahead and stopped. Just stopped dead, like it had hit an invisible wall. It turned, trapped, and that's when I saw its face in my flashlight beam. It was human, partially. A Navajo man. maybe 50 years old, but his body was twisted into a canine form. His eyes were human eyes, filled with terror and intelligence, and he was looking directly at me, mouth trying to form words it could no longer speak. The 3 pursuers stopped about 20 feet behind him, and one of them laughed. The sound made my skin crawl. Then the leader spoke, and I understood the words even though he used the old dialect my grandmother sometimes spoke. "You cannot cross the line, cousin. Not at this place. The protection holds here, but there are gaps. 23 gaps along the boundary where the ceremonies were never completed. We know where they are, and we will drive you to them." The transformed man shook his head frantically. His front paws scrabbled at the ground, trying to push himself backward, but it was like the air itself was solid beyond that point. I stepped forward, weapon drawn. "Navajo Tribal Police. Identify yourselves." The 3 pursuers turned to look at me, and I saw their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't human either, not entirely. Their features shifted between human and animal, never settling on one form, but their eyes were ancient, knowing, and utterly cold. "Officer," the leader said in perfect English now, "this is not your jurisdiction. This is boundary law, older than your badge, older than your nation. Everything on Navajo land is my jurisdiction. Step away from him. He is Yi Naudlushi, skinwalker. He has broken sacred law. He must be punished." I knew the word, even though we didn't say it. Knew the stories. Knew that skinwalkers were witches who'd gained the ability to transform by committing terrible acts. Knew they were feared and hunted by traditional Navajos. But I also saw the terror in the transformed man's eyes. Whatever he'd done, whatever he'd become, he was being hunted like an animal. I don't care what he is. I'm taking him into custody. We have a justice system. The leader laughed again. "Your justice system is 150 years old. Ours is 1,000. And it was compromised 160 years ago by the same government you serve. Now the compromises are failing, the gaps are widening, and something much worse than skinwalkers is using them to return." "What are you talking about?" 1864, the Long Walk. When your people were forced to march 300 miles to Bosque Redondo. 8,000 died on the march, in the camps, in the 4 years of imprisonment. Their rage never dissipated. It was contained, sealed outside the reservation by ceremonies performed when your people returned in 1868. But the government sent agents to sabotage those ceremonies. They left gaps. 23 weak points where the seals are incomplete. And now, 160 years later, those gaps are failing. The rage is coming back. Before I could respond, the transformed man bolted. But not away from the boundary, toward it. He'd spotted something I couldn't see, some difference in the invisible barrier. He ran parallel to the line for about 30 yards, then suddenly veered and crashed through. The moment he crossed, I felt it. A pulse of wrongness, like reality itself had flinched. The air temperature dropped 20 degrees. The stars above flickered. And from somewhere far away, I heard a sound like 10,000 voices screaming in unison. The 3 pursuers cursed in the old language and took off after him. But before they crossed the boundary, the leader turned back to me. "Find the gaps, officer. Seal them before the equinox. You have 1 week. After that, the rage will be strong enough to cross anywhere, and your reservation will become a hunting ground for something that will not distinguish between the guilty and the innocent." Then they were gone, vanished into the darkness beyond the boundary. I stood there alone in the desert, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark, and I realized I was shaking, not from fear, though I was afraid, from the weight of what I'd just witnessed. The boundary between Navajo land and the outside world wasn't just legal or political. It was spiritual, and it was failing. I got back to my vehicle and drove straight to the tribal police headquarters in Window Rock. It was 3 a.m. when I arrived, but I called my captain anyway. James Begay, a traditional Navajo in his 60s who'd been on the force for 40 years. I told him everything. The transformed man, the pursuers, the boundary, the gaps. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Your grandmother," he finally said. "She ever tell you about the return ceremonies?" "Some." She said when the Navajo people came back from Bosque Redondo in 1868, they performed ceremonies to protect the land, to make sure the trauma of the long walk stayed outside. That's the simple version. The truth is more complicated. The ceremonies were meant to seal away the rage, the collective fury of everyone who died on the march, everyone who suffered in the camps, everyone who lost family. That rage was so strong it took on a form, a consciousness. The elders of 1868 couldn't destroy it. Rage that justified doesn't just disappear, so they sealed it outside the new reservation boundaries, kept it from poisoning the land and the people who returned. But the government sabotaged the ceremonies. Yes, the Indian agents knew about the ceremonies. They didn't believe in the spiritual aspects, but they believed in control. They wanted the Navajo people to remain traumatized, broken, easier to manage. So they interrupted ceremonies, scattered participants, stole sacred objects. They created 23 gaps in the seal, small enough that the rage couldn't fully enter, but large enough that it could influence, could whisper, could slowly work its way back in. And now? Now it's been 155 years. The rage has been learning, growing, testing the gaps, and something changed recently. The gaps are widening. In another week, at the equinox when the boundaries between worlds are weakest, they might fail completely. I sat down, trying to process this. So, what do? We find the gaps. We complete the ceremonies that were interrupted in 1868. We seal the boundary properly, but Karen, there's a problem. The ceremonies require specific knowledge, specific words and actions that were lost when the elders who remembered them died. My grandmother knew some, but not all. We'd need to find someone who has the complete ceremony. Who would have that? Captain Begay looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. The skinwalkers. They preserve the old knowledge, even the sacred parts. They'd know, but getting them to help us would mean negotiating with people we've been hunting for generations. The 3 I saw tonight, they seemed to want the gaps sealed. They said something worse than skinwalkers is using them to return. Then they understand the threat. The rage doesn't distinguish between skinwalker and non-skinwalker, between guilty and innocent. It will destroy everything Navajo if it gets through. Even those who've embraced dark practices don't want that. Over the next 2 days, I worked with Captain Begay to identify the gaps. We used old maps from 1868, cross-referenced with reports of strange incidents along the boundary. Places where people reported feeling watched, where animals refused to go, where the air felt wrong. We found 17 of the 23 gaps. The others were in remote areas we hadn't mapped yet. But 17 was a start. On September 17th, 3 days after my encounter, I returned to the boundary near where I'd seen the transformed man. I went at dusk, the time between day and night, and I brought offerings. Tobacco, turquoise, corn pollen, things my grandmother had taught me to use when seeking help from the spirit world. I laid them out in a pattern she'd shown me and spoke in Navajo. I am Karen Benally, daughter of Rita Benally, granddaughter of Helen So. I seek the boundary walkers. I seek those who hunt in the spaces between. I seek your help. For a long time, nothing happened. The sun set. The stars emerged. The desert went quiet in that way it does at night, when even the insects seem to hold their breath. Then I felt them arrive, 6 figures emerging from the darkness, moving with that unnatural fluidity. They formed a circle around me, and I forced myself not to reach for my weapon. The leader from before spoke. "You came back." Brave or foolish, I cannot tell. "I came for information. You said there are 23 gaps. I found 17. I need to know where the others are, and I need to know how to seal them. And in exchange, I stop hunting you." I convinced the tribal police that you're not the enemy right now, that we have a common threat. The leader laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You cannot stop hunting us, officer. We are ye Naudlushi. We are abomination, corruption, the betrayal of sacred ways. Your people will always hunt us, as they should. But yes, for now, we have a common enemy, and it is far worse than we are." Another figure stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice was layered, like multiple people speaking in unison. "The rage has been calling to us, trying to recruit us. It knows we are already corrupted, already outside the sacred circle. It thinks we will join it when it breaks through. But it is wrong. We chose our corruption. We made our deals with dark forces for power, for revenge, for reasons that made sense to us. But the rage, it is mindless destruction. It will not stop with revenge on the descendants of those who caused the long walk. It will consume everything Navajo, because everything Navajo is a reminder of the pain. Then help me seal it out." The leader nodded slowly. "We will show you the remaining gaps. We will teach you the ceremonies. But officer, you must understand something. The gaps exist because government agents interrupted the original ceremonies. To seal them properly, you need to understand what was interrupted and why. You need to know the names of the agents who did this. You need to know which families they belong to. Because Karen Benally, granddaughter of Helen Zoe, the Rage has a list. It knows exactly who is descended from those who caused the long walk. And when it breaks through, it will find them, all of them." A chill ran through me. "Are you saying it's intelligent? That it can track specific bloodlines?" "Oh yes. It has had 155 years to study the world beyond the boundary. It knows the genealogies of every family that had a hand in the long walk, soldiers who forced the march, officers who commanded the camps, politicians who authorized the policy, agents who sabotaged the protection ceremonies. The Rage knows them all, and it knows their descendants. There are 2,847 people currently alive who carry that blood. Some live on the reservation, marriages between Navajo and white families. Some live in surrounding towns. Some have no idea their ancestors were even involved. So this isn't just about sealing gaps. It's about protecting 2,847 people from something that wants them dead. Not just dead, officer. Erased. The Rage wants to make them feel what the long walk victims felt. Terror, exhaustion, starvation, exposure, hopelessness. It wants them to die slowly, painfully, understanding why they're dying. It wants to teach a lesson that will echo through generations. I thought about that. About 8,000 people dying on a forced march. About children starving in camps. About families torn apart by a government that saw them as problems to be solved. And I thought about the rage that would create. The justified, righteous rage that had nowhere to go but inward, poisoning the survivors until the elders sealed it away. Is the rage wrong? I asked quietly. The people who did this, they were never punished. Their descendants benefited from the land that was taken, from the policies that destroyed Navajo sovereignty. Is wanting justice for that really wrong? The skinwalkers looked at each other. Finally, the leader spoke. We cannot answer that, officer. We are not judges of morality. We surrendered that right when we chose this path. But we can tell you this. Rage that old, that concentrated, that justified, it doesn't care about justice anymore, it only cares about pain. And it will not stop with the 2,847. Because everyone is descended from someone who did something. Everyone has ancestors with blood on their hands. The rage will find reasons to consume everyone until nothing remains but itself. Over the next 4 days, the skinwalkers showed me the remaining 6 gaps. Each one was in a remote location, a box canyon near Chinle, a mesa top near Kayenta, a wash near Tuba City. Places where ceremonies in 1868 had been interrupted by government agents who didn't believe in native spirituality, but understood that breaking up gatherings was a way to maintain control. At each gap, I could feel the wrongness. The air was thinner, colder, the light didn't fall quite right, and if I stood very still, I could hear it. The voice of the rage. 10,000 voices speaking as one. We remember. We remember the cold. We remember the hunger. We remember the children crying. We remember the soldiers laughing. We remember the promises broken. We remember everything. And we are coming home. The skinwalkers taught me the sealing ceremonies. Or rather, they taught me the words and actions, because they couldn't perform them themselves. Skinwalkers, by their nature, had broken the sacred covenants. Their presence would weaken rather than strengthen the seals. You must perform each ceremony at each gap, the leader explained, and you must do it before the equinox. After that, the boundaries between worlds are too thin. The rage will be able to force through regardless of the seals. The equinox is in 2 days, 23 gaps. That's impossible. Not if you have help. Gather medicine people. Gather traditionalists who know the old ways. Perform the ceremony simultaneously. It is the only way. I spent the next day calling every medicine person I knew, every traditional healer, every elder who'd maintained the old practices. Some refused. The ceremonies were sacred, not to be rushed or performed lightly, but others understood the urgency. Captain Bagai pulled strings with the tribal council. By the morning of September 21st, the day before the autumn equinox, we had 23 people willing to attempt the ceremonies. I assigned each person to a gap, gave them the words and actions the skinwalkers had taught me, and sent them out. I took the gap I'd found first, the one near Highway 491 where I'd seen the transformed man cross. At precisely noon, all 23 of us began the ceremony simultaneously. I won't describe the ceremony in detail out of respect for its sacred nature. But I will say it involved offerings, prayers in the old language, and creating a physical boundary using blessed cornmeal and turquoise. The goal was to complete what had been interrupted in 1868, to acknowledge the trauma, to honor the dead, to seal away the rage not by denying its justice, but by ensuring it couldn't consume the living. I felt the gap respond. The air grew warmer, the light normalized. The oppressive feeling of wrongness began to lift. But then I heard it. A voice that wasn't the rage, but wasn't entirely separate from it either. A voice that sounded like my grandmother. Karen, little sparrow, you are trying to cage us again. I froze, the ceremonial cornmeal spilling from my hands. Grandmother? We are in the rage, child. All who died, all who suffered. We became part of it because the pain was too great to bear alone, and now you would seal us away again, deny us our justice again. Grandmother, the rage will destroy everything. It won't stop with the guilty, because everyone is guilty, little sparrow. The soldiers who marched us, the officers who commanded them, the politicians who gave the orders, the settlers who took our land, the citizens who supported the policy, the descendants who benefited and never made amends. Where does guilt end? When does justice become revenge? We cannot answer that anymore. We can only feel the pain, the endless, screaming pain of dying slowly while your children starve in your arms. Tears streamed down my face. Grandmother, please. This isn't you. This is the rage speaking through you. The rage is us. We are the rage. There is no separation anymore. Karen, you want to seal us away to protect the guilty. But what about protecting the memory of the innocent who died? What about justice for them? Justice doesn't require more death. Then what does it require? Tell me, little sparrow, you who wear the uniform of tribal police, you who serve a system built on the ruins of what was destroyed. What does justice require? I didn't have an answer. I stood there at the gap, the ceremony half complete, and realized that I was caught between two impossible choices. Complete the ceremony and seal away my grandmother along with the rage, denying justice to 8,000 dead. Or leave the gap open and allow something that would destroy the living in the name of the dead. In the distance, I heard thunder. But the sky was clear. The sound was coming from beyond the gap, from the space where the rage had been sealed for 155 years. It was gathering its strength. In 24 hours, at the equinox, it would break through whether the gaps were sealed or not. I had to make a choice, and whatever I chose, someone would suffer for it. I picked up the cornmeal and continued the ceremony. My grandmother's voice screamed in protest, joined by thousands of others. But I pushed through, speaking the words, completing the actions. The gap sealed, the wrongness vanished, the boundary strengthened. But as the ceremony completed, I heard my grandmother's voice one last time, fading but clear. You have chosen the living over the dead, little sparrow. The settlers over the Navajo, the new over the old. We will remember this. And when the equinox comes, when the boundaries weaken, we will show you what your choice has cost. I collapsed to my knees in the dirt, the weight of what I'd done crushing down on me. I'd sealed away my own grandmother, trapped her again in the space outside the boundary where the rage dwelt. And for what? To protect descendants of the people who'd killed her. My radio crackled. Captain Begay's voice. All teams report. Did the ceremonies work? One by one, the reports came in. 22 confirmations, 22 gaps sealed. Only mine remained unreported. Unit 7, this is command. Karen, did the ceremony work? I picked up the radio with shaking hands. Yes, Captain, the gap is sealed. Good work, officer. All teams returned to Window Rock for debriefing. The boundary should hold now. I drove back in silence, watching the sun set over the reservation. The land looked the same as it always had. Red rocks, scattered vegetation, endless sky. But I knew something had changed. I'd chosen to protect the living at the cost of trapping the dead. And tomorrow, at the equinox, I'd find out if that was the right choice, or if I'd just made everything worse. The autumn equinox arrived at 2:50 a.m. Mountain Time on September 22, 2023. I know the exact moment because that's when I woke up screaming, my grandmother's voice echoing in my ears. But it wasn't just her voice, it was thousands of voices, all speaking the same words in unison. We are coming home. I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat, and looked at the clock. 2:50 a.m. The equinox. The moment when day and night are perfectly balanced, when the boundaries between worlds are at their thinnest. The moment we'd been dreading. My phone rang before I could process what I'd heard. Captain Begay. His voice was tight with controlled panic. "Karen, get to Window Rock headquarters immediately. We have a situation." 20 minutes later, I was in the command center with every available tribal police officer and a dozen traditional medicine people. On the wall were maps of the Navajo Nation with all 23 gaps marked. And on each gap, a red light was blinking. "They're all reopening," Captain Begay said. "Every single gap we sealed yesterday. The ceremonies held for less than 12 hours. At 2:50 a.m., they all failed simultaneously." Dr. Thomas Yazzie, one of the medicine men we'd consulted, shook his head in disbelief. That shouldn't be possible. The ceremonies were performed correctly. The seals should have held for at least a generation. "Unless the rage has gotten stronger," I said quietly. "Unless 155 years of anger has given it enough power to break through protections that would have held in 1868. Captain Begay pulled up satellite imagery on the main screen. "It's worse than the gaps reopening. Look at this." The image showed the eastern boundary of the Navajo Nation. Along the entire line, stretching from Arizona through New Mexico to Colorado, there was a visible distortion. The air itself looked wrong, warped, like heat shimmer but greenish-black in color. "That's not weather," Captain Begay said. "That's the rage. It's manifesting physically. And it's not just coming through the gaps anymore. It's testing the entire boundary, looking for any weakness." "How long before it breaks through?" I asked. Dr. Yazzie consulted with the other medicine people. They spoke in rapid Navajo, debating, calculating. Finally, he turned back to us. "Based on the rate it's pushing against the boundary, we estimate 3 days. Maybe 4. After that, the seals will fail completely, gaps or no gaps. The rage will pour into the reservation like water through a broken dam." 3 days to do what?" I demanded. "We tried sealing the gaps. We tried the traditional ceremonies. What else is there?" "Acknowledgement," said an elderly woman I recognized as May Sosi, one of the most respected medicine women on the reservation. "The rage exists because the trauma was never properly acknowledged. The government never admitted fault, never paid reparations beyond token gestures, never truly faced what was done. The rage is stuck because the wound was never allowed to heal. It was just sealed away, festering." "So what? We need the U.S. government to apologize? In 3 days?" "No," May said. "An apology from the government that perpetrated the act would be meaningless now. Everyone responsible is long dead, but their descendants, the 2,847 people who carry that blood, they could acknowledge it. They could face what their ancestors did. They could offer restitution. Real restitution. Land returned. Sovereignty respected. Wrongs addressed." Captain Begay was already shaking his head. "May, with respect, we can't even identify all 2,847 descendants in 3 days, let alone convince them to give up inherited land and wealth. It's logistically impossible." "Then the rage will break through," May said simply. "And it will find them anyway. But it will do so with violence, not justice. Karen, what did your grandmother say to you during the ceremony?" I hesitated. I hadn't reported that part to anyone. She asked where justice ends and revenge begins. She said everyone is guilty somehow, that the pain is too great to distinguish anymore. May nodded. The rage has a point. Where does guilt end? The soldiers who forced the long walk were following orders. The officers who gave those orders were following government policy. The politicians who made the policy were responding to settler demands. The settlers wanted land. and we can trace it back and back until everyone is guilty of something. But Karen, that's the problem. If everyone is guilty, then justice becomes impossible. It becomes only revenge. Then how do we stop it? We don't stop it. We transform it. We take the rage and we transmute it into something that can heal instead of destroy. But to do that, we need to understand it first. We need to know exactly what happened in 1864. Not the textbook version, the real version, the version your grandmother lived through. Dr. Yazzie stepped forward. There's a way to see the past, a ceremony that allows someone to walk in the memories of the dead. But it's dangerous. The person who performs it can become lost in the past, trapped in the trauma. We'd need someone with strong ties to the Long Walk victims, someone the rage might accept as a witness. Everyone looked at me. I felt my stomach drop. My grandmother was part of the rage. You want me to let it show me what happened? Yes, Mayte said. Because right now, we're fighting something we don't fully understand. We know the facts. 8,000 died, forced march, terrible conditions. But we don't know the texture of it, the specific horrors, the individual stories. The rage is made of those stories. To transform it, we need to hear them, all of them. And then we need to figure out how to acknowledge them in a way that allows the dead to rest. I wanted to refuse. The thought of experiencing what my grandmother experienced, of feeling the Long Walk's suffering firsthand, terrified me. But I looked at the map with the 23 blinking red lights and the greenish-black distortion pressing against our boundaries, and I knew I had no choice. How do we do this? May and the other medicine people spent the next hour preparing. They created a circle of sacred objects: turquoise, cornmeal, eagle feathers, sage. They sang prayers in the old language, calling on the spirits of the ancestors to guide and protect me. And they prepared a tea from datura and other plants that would open my mind to the past. Karen, May warned before I drank, what you're about to see is real. The pain is real. The suffering is real. It may be memory, but memory can kill if it's strong enough. If at any point you feel yourself slipping away, call out to us. We'll pull you back. But understand, if you break the connection too soon, you'll learn nothing. And the rage will know you gave up. It will become even angrier. I nodded and drank the bitter tea. The effect was almost immediate. The room began to blur and shift. The walls of the command center faded, replaced by high desert landscape under a relentless summer sun. I was no longer Officer Karen Benally in 2023. I was Helen Tso, my grandmother, in August 1864. And I was dying. The vision hit me like a physical blow. I was standing in a line of hundreds of Navajo people, all being forced to march east at gunpoint. Kit Carson's soldiers surrounded us on horseback, rifles ready. I could feel the sun burning my skin, feel the hunger gnawing at my stomach, feel the weight of the baby I carried on my back, my 2-year-old daughter already weak from malnourishment. We'd been walking for 6 days. The soldiers had given us almost no food or water. People were collapsing every few miles. The soldiers would check if they could walk. If they couldn't, they were shot and left where they fell. No burials, no prayers, just bodies in the dirt for the coyotes. I tried to remind myself this was a vision, a memory, but it felt completely real. The pain was real, the fear was real. And when my daughter whimpered on my back, the terror that the soldiers might see her as a burden and shoot her, that was real too. "Keep moving," a soldier shouted in English. I understood it because my grandmother had learned English, but many in the group didn't. They moved because the rifles made the message clear. A woman ahead of me stumbled and fell. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't hold her. A soldier rode over, looked down at her without expression, and raised his rifle. "No!" The cry came from a young man, probably her son. He ran forward, putting himself between the gun and his mother. "Please, I'll carry her. Please." The soldier considered this, then shrugged and shot them both. The sound echoed across the desert, and the line of marchers flinched but kept moving. We'd learned that stopping to help meant dying too. I wanted to close my eyes, to block it out, but I couldn't. The vision forced me to witness everything, every death, every moment of suffering, every small cruelty that added up to genocide. We marched for 18 days. People died every day, some from exhaustion, some from dehydration. Some simply gave up and sat down, waiting for death. I saw children crying over their parents' bodies. I saw elders who'd survived decades of life in the harsh desert finally break under the march. I saw pregnant women miscarry on the side of the trail, and I felt my own body failing. The baby on my back had stopped crying 2 days ago. I was terrified to check if she was still alive. If she was dead, the soldiers would make me leave her body. If she was alive, I didn't know how much longer I could carry her. On the 19th day, we reached Bosque Redondo, Fort Sumner, the place where we'd be imprisoned for the next 4 years. It was worse than the march. The fort was designed to hold maybe 2,000 people. They'd crammed 8,000 Navajo into it, with more arriving every week as different groups were rounded up and marched in. There was no shelter beyond what we could build ourselves, no adequate food or water, no medical care. Disease spread through the camps like fire. I watched my daughter die on the 3rd day at Bosque Redondo. Dysentery. She was 2 years old. I buried her in the hard ground with my bare hands because there were no tools. I marked her grave with a rock because there was nothing else. And I stayed there for hours, unable to leave, until soldiers dragged me back to the main camp for head count. That's when the rage began, not just in me, but in all of us. The fury at what had been done, the helplessness of being unable to protect our families, the betrayal of treaties broken, promises ignored, basic humanity denied. But we couldn't express the rage, couldn't fight back. The soldiers had guns, and we had nothing. So the rage turned inward, eating at us, poisoning us from within. Some people simply gave up and died, no medical reason, just the will to live extinguished. Others went mad, walking the perimeter of the camp in endless circles, muttering to themselves. I survived 4 years at Bosque Redondo. I don't know how. Maybe because the rage kept me alive, gave me something to hold on to when everything else was gone. When the government finally admitted the experiment had failed and allowed the Navajo to return home in 1868, I was one of the few thousand who were still alive. But the rage came back with us. In every survivor. The fury at what had been done, what had been taken, what could never be recovered. And the elders knew it would destroy us if we didn't deal with it. So they performed the ceremonies. They took all that collective rage, all that trauma, all that grief, and they sealed it outside the boundary of the new reservation. Not to deny it, but to protect the living from being consumed by it. The vision shifted. I was no longer at Bosque Redondo, but in a ceremony circle in 1868. I watched as medicine people worked to contain the rage, to create a spiritual boundary that would keep it from poisoning the land and the people. And I saw them, the government agents, Indian affairs officials who'd been sent to monitor the returning Navajo. They didn't believe in the spiritual aspects of what was happening, but they recognized that the ceremonies were helping the Navajo people heal, become strong again, regain their sovereignty, and they couldn't allow that. So they interrupted. scattered participants, confiscated sacred objects, created gaps in the seal. I heard one agent, a man named William Blackwood, explaining to another, "Let them keep some of their trauma. Wounded people are easier to control. If they fully heal, they'll resist our authority. Better to leave them permanently damaged." The rage heard those words, understood them, and in that moment, it became more than just collective trauma. It became conscious. It became aware that it had been deliberately preserved, deliberately weaponized against its own people, and it vowed that one day it would break free and make the perpetrators understand what they'd done. The vision began to fade. I felt myself being pulled back to 2023, back to the ceremony circle in Window Rock. But before I fully returned, I heard my grandmother's voice one more time. "Now you understand, little sparrow. Now you know what we carry. Now you know why we cannot simply forgive and forget. The trauma was inflicted deliberately. The healing was sabotaged deliberately. And for 155 years, we have been trapped in that moment, unable to move forward, unable to let go. Is our rage unjust? Or is your protection of the descendants who benefited from our suffering the real injustice?" I woke up screaming. May and the other medicine people were chanting, holding me in the circle, keeping me anchored to the present. Captain Begay knelt beside me, concern etched on his face. "Karen, are you back? Are you with us?" I nodded, but I couldn't speak yet. The memories, my grandmother's memories, were too fresh, too raw. I had experienced the long walk. I had felt my daughter die in my arms. I had lived 4 years of slow starvation and disease. And I understood now why the rage existed, why it couldn't simply be sealed away or prayed away. "What did you see?" Dr. Yazzie asked gently. I told them everything. The march, the deaths, the camp, the deliberate sabotage of the healing ceremonies. And I told them about William Blackwood, the agent who'd consciously decided to keep the Navajo people traumatized. Captain Begay was already on his computer. "William Blackwood, Indian Affairs Agent, 1860s. Let me see if I can find records of his descendants." While he searched, May spoke. "Karen, you now carry your grandmother's memories. You are a living bridge between the past and the present. The rage might accept you as someone who understands, someone who has earned the right to speak. Speak and say what? That I'm sorry? That I acknowledge the injustice? The rage already knows all that. It doesn't want words. It wants restitution." "Then maybe that's what we need to offer," Dr. Yazzie said. "Real restitution. Land returned. Sovereignty restored. The gaps in the boundary are physical manifestations of gaps in justice. Perhaps, to seal them permanently, we need to fill those gaps with actual justice." Captain Begay looked up from his computer, his face pale. "I found William Blackwood's descendants. There are 43 of them currently alive. And Karen, you need to see this." He turned the computer screen toward me. One of the names on the list was highlighted. James Benally. My father. I felt the world tilt. That's impossible. My father's family has been Navajo for generations. "Check the genealogy," Captain Begay said quietly. "Your father's great-great-grandmother was Anna Blackwood. She married a Navajo man, Robert Benally, in 1891. She changed her name, converted to traditional ways, was accepted into the community. But she was William Blackwood's daughter. Karen, you're descended from both the victims and the perpetrators. You carry both bloodlines." The room went silent. I sat there trying to process this. My grandmother Helen, who'd survived the long walk, and my great-great-great-grandmother Anna, whose father had deliberately sabotaged the healing ceremonies. Both of them were in my blood. That's why your grandmother's voice came to you during the ceremony, May said softly. And that's why the rage might listen to you now. You are literally the embodiment of the conflict. Victim and perpetrator. Oppressed and oppressor. In one person. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I opened it and felt my blood run cold. The message was in Navajo. The boundary fails tonight. The rage comes home. The 2,847 will be found. But you, Karen Benally, granddaughter of victims, great-great-great-granddaughter of perpetrators, you will choose. Join us in righteous rage, or stand with the guilty. Choose wisely, little sparrow. Your grandmother is watching. Attached to the message was a photo. It showed the eastern boundary of the reservation at night. The greenish-black distortion had thickened into something almost solid, and in that mass I could see faces, thousands of faces, all the dead of the long walk pressed against the boundary, waiting to break through. Captain Bege's radio crackled. Reports were coming in from all over the reservation. At each of the 23 gaps, manifestations were occurring. People were seeing the dead, hearing voices, experiencing visions of the long walk. The boundary was failing faster than predicted. "We don't have 3 days," Captain Begay said. "We have hours. By tonight, the rage will break through. And when it does, it will find every person on that list of 2,847 descendants. Karen, you're on that list. Your father is on that list. Half the reservation has some connection to the perpetrators because of intermarriage over 155 years. This isn't going to be a surgical strike against the guilty. It's going to be a bloodbath that doesn't distinguish between the truly responsible and the merely descended." "Then we need to stop it," I said, standing up on shaky legs. "Not by sealing it away again. That didn't work. We need to face it. We need to give it what it wants." "What does it want?" Dr. Yazzie asked. I remembered my grandmother's question. It wants acknowledgement, it wants justice, and it wants to know where justice ends and revenge begins. Because right now, it doesn't know. It's too consumed by pain to make that distinction. So we need to make it for them. We need to show the rage that there's a difference between holding people accountable and destroying everyone. "How?" May asked. "By offering ourselves," I said. "The 43 direct descendants of William Blackwood. We go to the boundary. We face the rage. We acknowledge what our ancestor did. We offer restitution, land, resources, power, and we accept whatever judgment the rage deems just. But we do it consciously, willingly. We don't run. We don't hide. We face it." Captain Begay was shaking his head. "Karen, that's suicide. The rage doesn't want acknowledgement. It wants blood. Maybe. Or maybe it wants to be heard, to be seen, to have someone finally face what was done instead of sealing it away or pretending it didn't happen. We won't know until we try." I pulled up the list of William Blackwood's descendants, 43 names, scattered across the reservation and surrounding towns. I started making calls. Some refused. Some didn't believe me. Some hung up when I mentioned William Blackwood. But some listened, some understood, and some agreed to come. By sunset, I had 19 of the 43 gathered at the eastern boundary near Shiprock. 19 people willing to face their ancestors' legacy. 19 people prepared to offer themselves to the rage as acknowledgement and restitution. We stood in a line facing the boundary as the sun disappeared below the horizon. The greenish-black distortion was now so thick it blocked out the stars behind it, and we could hear them. Thousands of voices speaking in unison, We are coming home. We are coming for justice. We are coming for blood. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but clear. I am Karen Benally, great-great-great-granddaughter of William Blackwood. He sabotaged your healing ceremonies in 1868. He deliberately kept you traumatized. He is responsible for your suffering continuing beyond what it should have been. On behalf of his blood, I acknowledge this. I apologize for this. And I offer restitution. What do you want from us? The voices went silent. The distortion rippled like water disturbed by a stone. And then a single figure stepped through the boundary. My grandmother, Helen So. But not as I'd known her in life. She was younger, the age she'd been during the long walk. And she was made of rage. Her form flickering between flesh and pure fury. "What do I want?" she asked, her voice echoing with thousands of others. "I want my daughter back. I want the 4 years of my life back. I want my people's land back. I want our sovereignty back. I want the treaties honored. I want the apologies to mean something. I want the trauma to be acknowledged not just in words, but in actions. Can you give me that, little sparrow? Can anyone?" "No," I said honestly. "I can't bring back the dead. I can't undo the past, but I can stand here and acknowledge it. I can promise to fight for the land and sovereignty that remains. I can promise to tell this story so it's never forgotten again. And I can offer you something else, my life. If my death will satisfy the rage, if it will stop this from consuming everyone else, then take it. I'm descended from both sides. Let my blood pay for both." My grandmother looked at me for a long moment. Behind her, the thousands of faces in the distortion watched and waited. "Your life is not enough," she finally said. "One life for 8,000? That's not justice. That's not even a down payment. But little sparrow, the fact that you offered, that means something. The fact that you stood here instead of running, that means something. The fact that you made others stand here too, that means something. For 155 years, no one has faced us. Everyone has run, or sealed us away, or pretended we don't exist. You are the first to stand and say, 'I see you. I acknowledge you. I am responsible.' And that is the beginning of healing." The distortion began to thin slightly. The rage was still there, but its intensity had decreased. Just a fraction, but noticeable. "But understand," my grandmother continued, "this is only a beginning. The rage does not disappear because you acknowledged it. Justice is not served because you stood here one evening. There are still 2,847 descendants, still unpaid debts, still land that was taken and never returned. We cannot simply forgive and move on. The wounds are too deep. But because you faced us, we will give you time. 1 year. You have 1 year to make real changes. Return land. Restore sovereignty. Create memorials. Teach the true history. Make the apology mean something with action. Do this, and we will consider the debt partially paid. Fail, and we will break through anyway. But this time, we will not distinguish between the guilty and innocent. We will take everyone. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good." My grandmother began to fade back into the distortion, but before she disappeared completely, she looked at me one more time. "I am proud of you, little sparrow. You did what I could not. You faced the pain instead of running from it. Now the hard work begins. Now you must convince others to face it too. And Karen, remember that you carry both bloodlines. You are both victim and perpetrator. Use that, be the bridge. Show both sides that healing is possible." Then she was gone, and the distortion pulled back from the boundary. Not completely. The rage was still there, still waiting, but the immediate threat had passed. We had 1 year. 1 year to attempt the impossible, to turn acknowledgement into justice and rage into healing. I turned to the 19 people who'd stood with me. We have work to do. The year my grandmother gave us started on September 23, 2023. By September 25th, I realized how impossible the task was going to be. The Tribal Council held an emergency session. I stood before them, 17 elected leaders of the Navajo Nation, and explained what had happened. The rage, the boundary, the 1-year deadline, the need for real action, not just words. Council President Raymond Nez listened patiently, then spoke the words I'd been dreading. Officer Benally, with respect, what you're asking for is politically impossible. You want us to demand that the U.S. government return land, restore full sovereignty, and pay reparations for events that happened 160 years ago. Even if we had the will, we don't have the power. And if we try to force this through confrontation, we lose what little autonomy we've managed to maintain. Then 2,847 people will die, I said flatly. The rage won't wait for political convenience. It will break through in 1 year regardless of our progress, unless we show real change. Councilwoman Betty Yazzie raised her hand. Karen, I believe you about the supernatural threat. The medicine people have confirmed it. But understand what you're asking. We'd need to identify all 2,847 descendants, convince them to participate in some form of restitution, navigate federal and state laws about land returns, and do this all while maintaining normal government operations. We don't have the resources or authority. Then we need to get creative, I said. We start with what we can control. The 43 direct descendants of William Blackwood. We already have 19 willing to help. We find the other 24. We pool our resources. We buy back land that was taken. We fund education programs about the Long Walk. We create a memorial that doesn't sugarcoat what happened. Small actions that show good faith to the rage. Dr. Yazzie, who'd been consulting with the council, spoke up. The rage wants symbolic justice and material justice. Symbolic, acknowledgement, memorials, education. Material, land, resources, sovereignty. We might be able to deliver on symbolic in 1 year. Material will take decades. Will the rage accept partial payment? I don't know, I admitted, but my grandmother said this was a beginning. Maybe if we show genuine effort, show that we're not running or hiding, the rage will give us more time. Council President Nez nodded slowly. All right. We'll create a task force. Karen, you'll lead it since you have the connection to the rage. Betty, you'll handle the legal aspects. Dr. Yazzie, you'll coordinate with traditional practitioners. We have 1 year. Let's see what we can do. Over the next 2 months, I learned exactly how deep the connections between victim and perpetrator ran. The 2,847 descendants weren't just scattered individuals. They were interwoven into Navajo society through 155 years of intermarriage, adoption, and cultural blending. Some were like me, mostly Navajo with one distant ancestor connected to the Long Walk. Others were mostly white with one Navajo ancestor. Some lived on the reservation and identified fully as Navajo. Others had never set foot on tribal land and barely knew their heritage. And many didn't want to be found, didn't want to face their ancestry, didn't want to acknowledge their connection to historical trauma. I spent weeks tracking down William Blackwood's descendants. The ones I found fell into categories. Some denied any responsibility. I didn't do anything. Why should I pay for what someone did 160 years ago? Others were genuinely ignorant of their connection. A few were angry at me for bringing it up, as if I was attacking them personally. But some understood. Some wanted to help. James Benally, my father, was in the last category. We met in his home in Gallup, New Mexico, a week after the confrontation at the boundary. We'd been estranged for years over different political views, but the revelation of our shared ancestry brought us together. "I never knew," he said, looking at the genealogy records I'd brought. My grandmother never talked about Anna Blackwood, just said she was from back east, came west and married into the tribe. I thought she was just another settler who'd assimilated. She did assimilate, fully, raised her children Navajo, learned the language, participated in ceremonies, but her father's actions are still part of our bloodline, and the rage knows. My father was quiet for a long time studying the papers. Finally, he looked up at me. "What do you need me to do?" "Help me find the others. Help me convince them to participate in restitution. We can't change the past, but we can acknowledge it and try to make amends. The rage needs to see that. And if they refuse, then they're on the list of 2,847 when the boundary fails. The rage won't distinguish between willing participants in their ancestors' crimes and unwilling inheritors of guilt. It will just see the bloodline." My father nodded. "Then we'd better get to work." Together, we tracked down 23 more Blackwood descendants over the next month. We presented them with the evidence, explained the situation, and asked for their help. 15 agreed. 8 refused. One of the refusals haunted me. Thomas Blackwood, a lawyer in Santa Fe, direct great-great-grandson of William. He listened to my explanation, reviewed the genealogy, and then shook his head. "Miss Benally, I sympathize with the historical trauma, but I'm not responsible for what my ancestor did. And frankly, this sounds like an elaborate scheme to extract money and land from people based on guilt by association. If your supernatural rage has a problem with William Blackwood, it should take it up with him. He's been dead for 130 years. The rage can't reach the dead who've moved on. It can only affect the living. And you carry William's blood. That makes you a target. Then I'll take my chances. Good day, Ms. Benally." As I left his office, I knew Thomas Blackwood had just signed his own death warrant. When the boundary failed, he'd be one of the first the rage found. But I couldn't force him to participate. Free will was still sacred, even in the face of supernatural justice. By November, we'd made progress on the symbolic front. The Tribal Council approved funding for a memorial at Window Rock. Not a sanitized, comfortable memorial, but a brutal, honest one. It would feature a timeline of the long walk with specific atrocity accounts, names of the dead where we had them, and a section dedicated to the government agents who'd sabotaged the healing ceremonies, with William Blackwood featured prominently. We also created educational programs for reservation schools, ensuring that every Navajo child learned the true history of the long walk. Not the textbook version that glossed over the horrors, but the real version. The version that included starvation, forced marches, mass graves, and deliberate cultural genocide. But the material front, land, resources, sovereignty, was harder. We pooled the resources of the willing Blackwood descendants and managed to buy back 150 acres of land that had been taken during the Long Walk period. It was returned to tribal control in a ceremony attended by the 19 original descendants who'd faced the rage. But 150 acres out of millions that had been taken. It was a gesture, a drop in an ocean. Would the rage accept it? In December, I got my answer. I was at one of the boundary gaps near Chinle, checking the seal integrity, when I felt the rage reach out to me. Not through voice, but through vision. I saw the memorial we were building, saw the education programs being taught, saw the 150 acres being returned, and I felt the rage's response: disappointment. But not anger. Disappointment like a teacher feels when a student tries hard but doesn't quite grasp the lesson. Then I heard my grandmother's voice, sad but patient. "You are trying, little sparrow. We see that, but you're thinking too small. 150 acres when millions were taken? A memorial when entire cultures were destroyed? Education when sovereignty is still compromised? These are band-aids on a severed limb. We appreciate the effort, but the wound requires more." "Tell me what will satisfy you," I said aloud. "Give me specific demands. I can't negotiate if I don't know what justice looks like to you." The vision shifted. I saw the Navajo Nation as it had been before the long walk. Massive territory spanning 4 states. Full sovereignty, not the limited version granted by federal law. Treaties honored, rights respected, resources controlled by the tribe, not leased to corporations. Cultural practices protected, not just tolerated. Then I saw it shrinking, losing territory year by year. The long walk taking millions of acres, subsequent policies taking more. Until what remained was a fraction of what had been, divided and controlled by federal oversight. "Make us whole," my grandmother said. "Not literally, we know that's impossible, but spiritually. Give us back our sovereignty, real sovereignty, the right to control our land without federal interference, the right to protect our resources, the right to govern ourselves without oversight. That's material justice. That's what would heal the wound. You're asking for something the U.S. government will never grant willingly. Then make them grant it unwillingly. You have leverage, little sparrow. The rage is pressing against the boundary. In 6 months, we will break through. When we do, we will not stay on the reservation. We will spread. Find every person on the list of 2,847, and through them, we will show the entire country what the long walk felt like. We will make the trauma visible, tangible, undeniable. That will force change, but it will be violent, chaotic, destructive. Or you can convince the government to act before we break through. Your choice." The vision faded, and I was back at the boundary gap, alone in the cold December wind. I understood now. The rage wasn't just about punishing the descendants. It was about forcing systemic change, about using the threat of violence to achieve what negotiation had failed to accomplish for 160 years. But there was a problem. I was a tribal police officer, not a revolutionary. I couldn't threaten the U.S. government with supernatural violence. That would make me a terrorist in their eyes, regardless of the justice of the cause. I needed help. I needed someone who understood politics, law, and how to leverage crisis into change. I needed Betty Yazzie, the councilwoman who'd been skeptical but willing to help. I found her in her office in Window Rock, reviewing legal briefs. When I explained what the rage had shown me, she leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. "So, the rage wants full sovereignty. The one thing the federal government will never give without a massive fight. Yes, and we have 6 months to make it happen, or 2,847 people die and the country gets a very visible demonstration of historical trauma." Betty was quiet for a long time. Then she sat forward, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. Determination. "Karen, what if we reframe this? What if instead of demanding the government give us sovereignty, we take it?" "What do you mean?" "The Navajo Nation is technically a sovereign nation. We have treaties. We have rights. The problem is that over the past 160 years, the federal government has gradually eroded those rights through policy and legal precedent. But the treaties still exist. What if we started enforcing them? unilaterally, without asking permission. That would be legally complicated. Let it be complicated. Let the government try to stop us. Right now, we're negotiating from weakness because we're asking for something. But if we act from strength, assert our existing rights, force them to challenge us, that changes the dynamic. And Karen, here's the thing. If the rage breaks through and starts attacking people across the country, the government will blame us anyway. They'll say we're harboring terrorists or allowing some kind of chemical agent across the border. They'll use it as an excuse to further limit our sovereignty. But if we act first, if we assert our rights before the crisis, we control the narrative. I thought about this. It was risky. It could backfire spectacularly. But Betty was right. Doing nothing guaranteed disaster. What would that look like practically? Start with resources. We have massive natural resources on reservation land: coal, uranium, oil. Currently, we lease extraction rights to corporations with federal approval. What if we stopped? What if we said, this is our land, our resources, and we're managing them ourselves? The corporations would sue, the government would intervene. But while they're fighting us in court, we're demonstrating genuine sovereignty. We're showing the rage that we're serious. That would devastate the tribal economy. Those leases fund our government. In the short term, yes. But long term, we'd have full control of resources worth billions. And Karen, if the alternative is the rage breaking through and causing national chaos, I think we take the economic hit. Over the next month, Betty built a coalition. She worked with the other council members, with tribal attorneys, with economists. By January 2024, she had a plan. The Navajo Nation would unilaterally cancel all resource extraction leases on tribal land, assert full sovereign control over its resources, and refuse federal oversight of tribal affairs. The vote passed the Tribal Council 10-7. Narrow, but enough. On January 15, 2024, the Navajo Nation made the announcement. Across the reservation, all corporate resource extraction stopped. The casinos, which required federal gaming compacts, were declared under full tribal control regardless of federal law. And the nation announced it would start enforcing its borders, treating entry onto tribal land like crossing an international boundary. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The corporations sued. The federal government called it illegal. The media portrayed it as a radical, separatist movement. Congress held hearings. The FBI launched investigations. And the rage watched from beyond the boundary, curious to see if we'd hold firm or cave under pressure. I spent February helping to train a new tribal border guard, volunteers who'd enforce the nation's self-declared sovereignty. We set up checkpoints, started documenting who entered and left the reservation, and generally acted like we were an independent country. It was chaos. But it was active chaos. We were doing something instead of just waiting for disaster. In March, I got another visit from my grandmother's spirit. This time, the rage manifested at my home in Shiprock. I woke at 3 a.m. to find her sitting at my Kit Reinhardt table. "You are taking sovereignty," she said, "not asking for it. This pleases us. Is it enough? Will you give us more time?" "Perhaps. But little sparrow, you must understand. The 2,847 descendants are not your only problem. Many of them have accepted their heritage, participated in restitution. But some are actively resisting. Some are working against you, trying to end this sovereignty movement before it threatens their interests. And those resistors, they are still on the list." "Who?" She showed me. Visions of 8 people, all descended from Long Walk perpetrators, all actively working to undermine the sovereignty push. Some were politicians lobbying Congress to intervene militarily. Some were corporate lawyers fighting the lease cancellations. Some were media figures painting the Navajo Nation as dangerous extremists, and one of them was Thomas Blackwood, the lawyer who'd refused to participate in restitution. He'd become a spokesperson for the Restore Federal Authority movement, arguing that the Navajo Nation's actions were illegal and dangerous. These 8, my grandmother said, they work against healing. They perpetuate the wound. When we break through, and we will break through in 3 months unless you achieve full recognition of sovereignty, they will be the first we find, and their deaths will not be quick. You're asking me to stop them. We're asking you to choose. Are they more important than the other 2,839 who've tried to make amends? Than the thousands of Navajo who will suffer if we break through in rage rather than transformation? You have power now, little sparrow. You've built an organization. You've inspired a movement. Use that power. Stop those who would sabotage healing. I'm not an executioner. No. But you are a police officer, and they are committing crimes, sabotage, conspiracy to deny civil rights, incitement. Arrest them. Use the law you claim to serve. Remove them from the equation so the healing can continue. Then she was gone, and I was left alone with an impossible choice. Arrest American citizens for political speech and legal advocacy. That was tyranny, regardless of the cause. But let them continue, risk the rage breaking through, and potentially cause thousands of deaths? I chose to do my job, to investigate their activities legally and see if they'd actually broken laws. If they had, I'd arrest them. If not, I'd find other ways to counter their influence. It turned out 3 of the 8 had broken laws. Corporate bribery, incitement to violence against tribal officials, conspiracy to violate federal trust responsibilities. I built cases against them carefully, worked with FBI agents who were sympathetic to tribal sovereignty, and by April, all 3 were arrested. Thomas Blackwood was not among them. His advocacy was legal, protected speech. I couldn't touch him, but I could warn him. I showed up at his Santa Fe office in late April, 3 weeks before the 1-year deadline. I brought evidence of what was coming, photos of the boundary distortions growing stronger, testimonies from medicine people about the rage's building power, and a list of the 2,847 names with his highlighted in red. Mr. Blackwood, you have 3 weeks to change your mind. 3 weeks to stop fighting and start helping. After that, the boundary fails and the rage comes for everyone on this list, including you. He looked at the evidence, then at me with contempt. Miss Benally, this is a transparent intimidation attempt. You're threatening me with supernatural violence to suppress my legal advocacy. That's terrorism. It's a warning. You're descended from William Blackwood, who deliberately sabotaged healing ceremonies in 1868. The rage knows this. It's been waiting 156 years to find his bloodline. In 3 weeks, it will. Then I guess I'll take my chances with your rage. Better that than surrender to extortion. As I left his office, I knew Thomas Blackwood would die, and some part of me wondered if he deserved it. If his refusal to acknowledge his heritage, his active work against healing, made him complicit in his ancestors' crimes, if there was such a thing as inherited guilt. But another part of me knew that this thinking was dangerous, that judging people by their bloodline rather than their actions was exactly the kind of injustice we were supposed to be fighting against. On May 15, 2024, 1 week before the deadline, the U.S. government made an unexpected move. They offered to negotiate, not full sovereignty, but expanded autonomy, recognition of the Navajo Nation as having domestic-dependent sovereign status with enhanced powers. Control over resources with minimal federal oversight. Increased funding for tribal programs. It wasn't everything, but it was significant. More than any tribe had achieved since the 1800s. Betty Yazzie led the negotiations. The discussions went through the night, and on May 21st, 24 hours before the deadline, an agreement was reached. The Navajo Nation would gain substantial sovereignty, though not complete independence. In exchange, we'd end the border enforcement and allow corporate leases to resume under tribal control. It was a compromise. It didn't fully heal the wound. But it was real material change, not just symbolic gestures. The question was, would the rage accept it? I went to the eastern boundary at midnight on May 22nd, the anniversary of when my grandmother had given us the one-year deadline. The distortion was there, thicker than ever, pressed against the failing seals. I could see the faces in it now without visions. Thousands of the dead, waiting. I called out to them. We've made progress. Real progress. Sovereignty has been expanded. Resources returned to tribal control. The memorial is built. The education continues. We've shown good faith. We've tried. Is it enough? The distortion rippled, and my grandmother stepped through, fully manifested this time. Behind her, the thousands of dead of the long walk watched and waited for her judgment. You have tried, little sparrow. You have fought harder than we expected. You have achieved more than we thought possible in 1 year. The expanded sovereignty is significant. The material changes are real. We acknowledge this. Then, will you give us more time? Let the healing continue? My grandmother looked at me with eyes that held both love and sorrow. We will give you time. But not all of us. Some of the rage, the deepest, most justified portion, must be released, must be allowed to finish what it started. 8 people worked actively against healing. 3 you arrested. 5 remain, including Thomas Blackwood. Those 5, we claim them. Justice demands it. We will not take the other 2,842 who tried to make amends, but those 5 who actively fought against healing, who perpetuated the wound, they are ours. That's still murder. No, it is justice 156 years delayed. They had the chance to participate in healing. They chose to obstruct it. Actions have consequences, little sparrow, even for descendants of perpetrators who've had 156 years to make different choices. Before I could argue further, the rage burst through the boundary. But not all of it, just a fraction. A thin stream of focused fury that shot past me and disappeared into the night, heading toward 5 specific targets, including Thomas Blackwood in Santa Fe. I got in my vehicle and raced toward the Santa Fe, but I knew I'd be too late. The rage moved faster than any car. By the time I reached Thomas Blackwood's home, emergency services were already there. They found him in his living room, dead. No marks on him, no signs of violence, but his face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, and written in frost on the windows, frost in May in New Mexico, were Navajo words, "Your ancestors' debt is paid." 4 other deaths occurred that night. All descendants of Long Walk perpetrators who'd actively fought against the sovereignty movement. All found dead with no medical explanation. All with frost-written messages acknowledging what their ancestors had done. The FBI investigated. The media sensationalized. But without physical evidence of how they died, the cases went unsolved. Mysterious deaths linked to Native American activist movement, the headlines read. They tried to paint the Navajo Nation as dangerous, violent, extremist. But Betty Yazzie was ready. She held a press conference where she detailed everything. The long walk, the deaths, the broken treaties, the sovereignty struggle. She didn't mention the rage directly, but she made it clear. Historical trauma has consequences. Justice delayed is not justice denied. And the 5 who died had actively worked to prevent healing. Public opinion was split. Some saw it as justified. Some saw it as terrorism. But no one could deny that something significant had happened, that the Navajo Nation had asserted real power for the first time in 150 years, and that the dead of the Long Walk had finally been acknowledged. On May 23rd, the distortion at the boundary faded. Not completely. My grandmother said some rage would always remain, a reminder of what had been done, but it was no longer pressing to break through. The immediate crisis had passed. I visited the memorial at Window Rock. It was complete now, a stark, honest accounting of the Long Walk. William Blackwood's name was carved in a special section titled, "Those Who Extended the Suffering." His descendants, who'd helped with restitution, were listed in a different section, those who chose healing. Thomas Blackwood's name would never be listed anywhere. He'd chosen neither healing nor honest opposition. He'd chosen denial, and denial, in the face of historical trauma, had consequences. I stood at the memorial thinking about justice and revenge, about inherited guilt and chosen actions, about wounds that can heal, and wounds that must sometimes bleed before they can scar over properly. My phone rang. Captain Begay. "Karen, we need you at the station. We're creating a new division, Historical Justice and Boundary Protection. We need someone to lead it. Someone who understands both sides." Both sides? Victim and perpetrator, living and dead, past and present. You're the bridge, Karen. And bridges are what we need now. The rage is contained but watching. We have more work to do, more amends to make, more healing to pursue. Are you ready? I looked at the memorial, at my grandmother's name carved among the 8,000 dead. I thought about the Long Walk, about boundaries and seals and rage that was justified but needed to be transformed, about the impossible task of balancing justice with mercy, accountability with forgiveness, remembering with moving forward. "I'm ready," I said. Because the reservation line wasn't just a boundary between land and land. It was a boundary between past and future, between trauma and healing, between rage and reconciliation. And someone had to walk that line, hold both sides and help the world find a way forward that honored the dead without destroying the living. That someone was me now, the bridge between worlds. The officer who could speak to both the rage and the system, the woman who carried both victim and perpetrator in her blood and refused to let either define her completely. The work wasn't finished. It would never be finished. Historical trauma doesn't disappear in 1 year or even 1 generation. But we'd started. We'd faced the rage instead of sealing it away. We'd acknowledged the wound instead of pretending it didn't exist. And we'd shown that healing was possible, even if it required first letting some of the justified rage bleed out. The reservation line would hold, for now, and I would walk it, maintaining the balance, ensuring that the dead were honored and the living were protected, because that's what bridges do. They connect 2 sides that both need to exist, both deserve respect, both have truth, and sometimes bridges have to bear the weight of both sides at once. It's heavy, it's painful, but it's necessary, so I would bear it, for as long as I could, until another bridge was ready to take my place. The rage had given us time. Now we had to prove we deserved it. 5 years have passed since the rage broke through and claimed those 5 lives. 5 years of walking the line between the living and the dead, between justice and mercy, between remembering and moving forward. This is where my story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. In those 5 years, I've learned that historical trauma isn't something you heal once and forget. It's something you carry, honor, transform, and pass on in healthier forms. The rage didn't disappear when we expanded Navajo sovereignty. It transformed, became something we could work with, instead of something that consumed us. The boundary between the Navajo Nation and the surrounding states is different now. Not just legally, though that changed significantly. Spiritually, energetically, the line has become something new. Not a cage keeping rage out, but a membrane that filters and transforms trauma into activism, pain into purpose, grief into governance. I lead the Historical Justice and Boundary Protection Division now. We're 15 officers, all descended from both sides of the Long Walk. Victim and perpetrator bloodlines mixed over 160 years of complicated history. Our job is to maintain the balance, keep the rage from growing too strong and breaking through again, keep the living from forgetting and repeating the same injustices, and help both sides heal in whatever way healing is possible. The memorial at Window Rock has become a pilgrimage site. People come from across the country, native and non-native, to witness the brutal honesty we've carved in granite. The atrocity accounts are hard to read. Parents cover their children's eyes at the descriptions of the camps, the starvation, the death marches. But we don't soften them. The rage taught us that sanitized history enables repeated injustice. Only by facing the full horror of what was done can we ensure it doesn't happen again. William Blackwood's name is still there in the Those Who Extended the Suffering section, but now it's surrounded by others. We've researched and added every government agent, military officer, and politician who participated in the Long Walk and its aftermath. 247 names, all public, all acknowledged. And in the Those Who Chose Healing section, we've added 2,347 names. The descendants who participated in restitution, who worked for sovereignty, who chose to acknowledge their heritage and make amends. My name is there. My father's name is there. We earned our place through action, not just intention. Thomas Blackwood's name appears nowhere. His death is marked only by a small plaque in a separate section. 5 who fought healing and paid the price demanded by historical trauma. May their sacrifice teach others the cost of willful ignorance. It's controversial. Some call it victim blaming, but Betty Yazzie, who's now president of the Navajo Nation, defends it. They had choices. They chose poorly. We don't celebrate their deaths, but we don't pretend they didn't happen or weren't consequences of their actions. Truth requires acknowledging all of it. The expanded sovereignty has transformed the nation. We control our resources now, the uranium, the coal, the oil. We lease them on our terms or don't lease them at all. We've transitioned heavily toward solar and wind, using our vast, empty land for renewable energy. The revenue funds schools, hospitals, cultural programs. We're not rich, but we're autonomous in ways we haven't been since before the Long Walk. And the rage watches, approves, occasionally still communicates. My grandmother visits me once a year, on the anniversary of when she gave us the deadline, May 22nd. I go to the eastern boundary at midnight, and she manifests from the thin distortion that permanently remains there. Last year's visit, our 5th, was different. She appeared not as rage, but as herself, Helen So as she'd been before the Long Walk. Young, whole, at peace. The anger has transformed, little sparrow, she told me. We're still here, still watching, but we're no longer consumed by pain. You did that, your generation, by facing us instead of sealing us away, by acknowledging us instead of forgetting, by acting instead of just talking. The wound has scarred. It still hurts, but it no longer bleeds. "Are you at peace then?" I asked. She smiled sadly. "Peace is too simple a word. We are resolved. We understand now that our suffering was not meaningless. It created change eventually. It forced acknowledgement. It transformed the survivors into people strong enough to fight for sovereignty. Pain without meaning is unbearable. But pain that creates change, that teaches lessons, that prevents future suffering, that pain can be borne, can be integrated, can become wisdom instead of just trauma." The 5 who died. Do you regret them? No. They made their choices with full knowledge of consequences. They chose to actively harm healing. Justice required a response. Would I have preferred they choose differently? Yes, but I don't regret administering consequences when they chose harm. That's what justice is, Karen, not revenge, not forgiveness. Justice is ensuring that actions have proportionate consequences. Those 5 got exactly what they earned through deliberate sabotage of healing. The other 2,842 got grace and the chance to make different choices. That's the balance. I think about that conversation a lot. About justice versus revenge. About when consequences become executions. About where the line is and who gets to draw it. I've made peace with my role. I'm the bridge. I speak for the dead to the living and for the living to the dead. I help both sides understand each other. I maintain the boundary, not as a wall, but as a filter that transforms rage into activism, pain into policy, grief into governance. But it's exhausting. The mark on my palm from when I first performed the sealing ceremony has spread. It covers my entire right arm now, looking like circuit board patterns made of turquoise light. It glows faintly at night. Dr. Yazzie says I'm becoming like the boundary itself, neither fully living nor fully connected to the rage, but something in between. A permanent conduit. I asked my grandmother about it last May. Am I dying? Transforming into something else? Both, she said. The work of bridging worlds changes you. You're becoming more like us, part memory, part warning, part guardian. When your time comes to pass from the living world, you won't fully leave. You'll join us in the boundary space, be another voice for the dead, another teacher for the living. It's not a curse, little sparrow, it's a calling. You're becoming ancestral even while still alive. I have maybe 10 more years before the transformation completes. 10 years to train my replacement. 10 years to document everything I've learned about walking the line between justice and mercy. 10 years to prepare for becoming part of the very boundary I've been protecting. My daughter, Elena, yes, I named her after my grandmother Helen, anglicized, is 8 now. She already shows the signs, the sensitivity to the boundary, the ability to hear whispers from the rage. She'll inherit this burden and this gift, and I'm teaching her how to bear it. Why do we have to remember the bad things, Mama? She asked me last week, looking at pictures of the Long Walk Memorial. Why can't we just forgive and forget? Because forgetting is how it happens again, I told her. Because the people who did this wanted us to forget, wanted us to die, wanted us to disappear. Remembering is resistance. Remembering is survival, and teaching others to remember. That's how we make sure your children don't have to carry the same rage we've been carrying. We carry it now so you don't have to carry it the same way. We transform it from rage into truth, from pain into power, from grief into governance. That's what the boundary does. It's not a wall, it's a transformer, and we guard the transformer. She thought about that, then nodded. When I'm big, will I guard it too? Yes, little one. But hopefully by then, the rage will be even more transformed. Hopefully, your job will be easier than mine. That's the goal. Each generation carries it a little better, hurts a little less, transforms it a little more. Until one day, maybe, the boundary becomes just a line on a map again. No rage, no trauma, just history remembered but no longer repeating. You think that'll happen? I hope so, but even if it doesn't, even if there's always some rage, always some pain, always some need for boundaries and bridges, that's okay too. Because some things should never be forgotten. Some injustices should always be remembered. The trick is remembering without being consumed, acknowledging without being destroyed, and that's what we teach. The Navajo Nation is different now than it was 5 years ago. Stronger, more sovereign, more connected to its history while also more confidently stepping into its future. The long walk isn't something we hide or sanitize anymore. It's something we study, honor, learn from. School children visit the memorial, read the accounts, ask hard questions about how humans can do such things to each other. And we tell them the truth. Humans do terrible things when they see others as less than human, when they value land more than lives, when they let convenience override compassion. The long walk happened because the U.S. government saw Navajo people as obstacles to expansion, rather than as human beings with rights. And it could happen again if we forget. To anyone. The specifics change, but the pattern remains. That's why we guard the boundary. Not just the physical line between the nation and the surrounding states, but the moral boundary between acknowledging past wrongs and repeating them. Between justice and revenge. Between remembering and being consumed by memory. I've trained 7 officers to do what I do. They're all like me, descended from both sides, able to speak to both the rage and the living. They're the next generation of bridges. When I transform fully and join my grandmother in the boundary space, they'll continue the work. Last week, I got a call from the FBI. There's a mass grave that's been discovered in Oklahoma. Trail of tears casualties. Cherokee dead who were never properly buried. And something's starting to happen there. Distortions in the air. Voices on the wind. Historical trauma manifesting physically just like it did here. They want to know if what we learned on the Navajo Nation can be applied to other indigenous traumas. If the model we developed, acknowledgement, restitution, transformation, can work for the Cherokee, the Lakota, the Seminole, all the tribes that experienced forced relocation and cultural genocide. I told them yes, it can work, but it requires facing the truth, even when the truth is ugly. It requires descendants of perpetrators acknowledging their heritage and making real amends. It requires survivors and their descendants being willing to transform rage into activism instead of letting it consume everything. And it requires people like me, bridges who can speak to both sides and hold the tension while healing happens. I'm going to Oklahoma next month to consult. Elena's coming with me. She needs to see how this work is done in other places, how the principles we've developed here can adapt to different traumas, different tribes, different historical injustices. Because the truth is, the United States is covered in boundaries like ours. Places where historical trauma is sealed away, waiting to break through. Places where the dead are angry and the living have forgotten or never learned. Places where injustice was never properly acknowledged, let alone addressed. And those boundaries are failing, all of them. What happened on the Navajo Nation is happening everywhere. The rage of historical trauma is breaking through, demanding acknowledgement, requiring justice. The question is whether we face it honestly and transform it, or whether we keep running and sealing it away until it explodes. I've seen both paths. I've walked the line between them. And I can tell you, facing it is harder in the moment, but healing in the long run. Sealing it away is easier in the moment but catastrophic eventually. The reservation line taught me that. The boundary between the Navajo Nation and the rest of America isn't just a legal or geographical line. It's a moral one. It's the line between a society that faces its historical traumas and one that buries them. Between a people who remember and a people who forget. Between accountability and denial. And that line is everywhere. In every community with historical injustice in its past. In every family with complicated ancestry. In every person who benefits from systems built on others' suffering. We all have to choose which side of that line we're on. Do we acknowledge and work to repair? Or do we deny and hope the consequences never catch up? I chose to be the bridge, to stand on the line itself and help both sides see each other. It's cost me my fully human life. I'm transforming into something that exists partially in the space with the dead, partially in the world of the living. But it's the most important work I've ever done, maybe the most important work anyone can do. As I finish recording this, I'm sitting at the eastern boundary of the Navajo Nation. The sun is setting, painting the desert in colors that don't quite exist in normal light. The boundary distortion is visible, a thin shimmer in the air, like heat waves but tinged with turquoise and sadness. And in that shimmer I can see them. My grandmother, the 8,000 dead of the Long Walk, the ancestors who carry our trauma and our wisdom. They're not angry anymore, they're watchful, protective, teaching. They've transformed from rage into something more complex, a permanent reminder of what was done, what was survived, what was learned. They're the conscience of the nation now. The voice that asks, are we being just? Are we honoring those who suffered? Are we ensuring it never happens again? And I'm their voice in the living world, their translator, their bridge. It's a heavy responsibility, but it's also an honor, because they trust me to tell their story truthfully, to hold both their pain and their resilience, to transform their trauma into wisdom that helps others avoid the same suffering. I've been asked if I regret the work I've done, if I wish I'd stayed just a police officer, never entered that storm, never made the promises that changed my life. The answer is no, because the work needed doing. The dead needed acknowledgement. The living needed truth. And someone had to be willing to stand on the boundary and hold both. That someone was me. It still is me. And when my transformation completes and I join my grandmother in the space between, it will still be me, just in a different form. The reservation line isn't just a boundary anymore. It's a transformer, a teacher, a memorial, a warning, a promise. It's where historical trauma comes to be witnessed, acknowledged, transformed. Where the dead and living meet, where rage becomes wisdom, where pain becomes power. And I guard it, will always guard it, because some lines need to be held, some truths need to be spoken, some bridges need to be maintained. This is my story, the story of the reservation line, the boundary that wouldn't stay sealed, the rage that demanded justice, the grandmother who gave us a year, the descendants who faced their heritage, the transformation of trauma into sovereignty, the price of acknowledgement, the cost of denial, the weight of being a bridge, and the choice we all face. Do we seal away uncomfortable truths and hope they stay buried? Or do we face them, acknowledge them, learn from them, and transform them into wisdom? I chose to face them. It cost me my fully human existence. But it gave me purpose, gave voice to the voiceless, gave power to the powerless, gave truth to history, and gave my daughter a world where maybe, just maybe, the rage will be a little less by the time she takes over. That's all we can do. Transform it a little. Carry it a little better. Pass it on a little lighter. Generation by generation. until one day the boundary is just a line on a map, the rage is just memory, and the dead can finally, fully rest. We're not there yet, maybe we never will be, but we're closer than we were, and that's because we chose to face the truth instead of sealing it away. The reservation line holds, the rage transforms, the bridge stands, and I walk the line between worlds, keeping both sides honest, helping both sides heal, until it's time to cross over fully and become part of what I've been guarding all along. The boundary, the memory, the warning, the hope, the reservation line.